Knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested.
Welcome back to the homestead, y'all. It's time for us to redo one of our solar trackers. This is one I built about 9 years ago. I've got 3 75-watt panels still on here. I had 6 on here before. You can see I've already taken one off from this side, and I had 2 lengthways on the top of it. But what we're going to do is we're going to take these 75-watt panels down. I've already unhooked all the quick connects to them. We're going to use these on the barn. I have some brand new 250-watt 24-volt panels to put back on here. Like I said, these are 75-watt 12 volts. I had each 2 hooked in series because we have a 24-volt system. So remember, when you hook anything in series, you double the voltage, but your amperage stays the same. When you hook them in parallel, the voltage stays the same, but your amperage doubles. So since these were 12-volt panels, I had them in series. There were 24 volts for each 2 panels, but the amperage stayed the same. So now we're going to go ahead and redo this. I built this probably 9 years ago. And I just used scrap that I had laying around the homestead here, but I'm going to redo it this time a little bit better. I'm going to redesign it. And originally I was just going to go ahead and jerk these panels off here and weld some angle iron, some 1.5 inch, 1/4 inch angle iron on here, but I thought everybody may not have access to a welder. So I've come up with a design that you don't have to have a welder. We'll just bolt them on. It won't be quite as strong, but it'll be plenty strong enough to hold these panels. One thing you have to remember, if you're in a high wind area, these panels take up a lot of surface. So you have to make sure that you design your solar tracker to withstand the wind in your area. We have a lot of wind here. We have a high wind area. That's why we chose this, because it was perfect for solar and perfect for wind. We're at one of the highest points in our county here. 270 degrees around us. We have a view for miles and miles. And in the wintertime, from the north, which is that direction, we have massive winds and there's nothing to stop it. One little small row of trees and that's it. So anything that we design, especially for our solar trackers, it has to be able to withstand 70, 80 mile an hour winds, because we get 70 mile an hour winds up here. So we're going to go ahead and take these panels off, strip it down to just the head. I'm going to show you where I get my heads, how I get them. I'm going to show you how to design a solar tracker for less than $100. So everything we're going to do here, I'm going to spend around $100 on it, except for the pole that goes down in the ground. That's the only thing I'm not including in this. The pole that goes down in the ground, depending on where you're at, on what type you're going to have, whether you have sandy soil, clay soil, or if you're like us, you can only go about 12 to 18 inches down and you hit solid rock. So what I did with my solar trackers, I contacted a well driller in our area and asked him to price me to come up here and put 6 pieces of well casing down in the ground. I've got a hitchhiker here climbing up my back, a little kitten, but come on down, little bitty. Oh. So what I did is I contacted a local well driller, and he came up here and he drilled 6 holes, put a piece of 6-inch well casing, 20-foot stick, 15 feet down the ground, so that left 5 feet above the ground for me. So I had him come up here, he drilled 6 holes, 6 different holes, set up 6 times, drilled all the way down in through solid rock, put me a 20-foot stick of well casing. I plumbed them up, concreted them into the rock, and then concreted up and then mounted my head on top of that, and then concreted it in the well casing. Now what these are, do you remember back in the 80s, for those of you who are old enough, and those of you who aren't, they're still around everywhere, these old mesh satellite dishes that everybody had. Some of them were fiberglass, some of the older ones were fiberglass. Well, that's what I used to build my solar trackers. And that's what's behind these panels, and I'll show you when I take these panels off and strip it down to just the head. on it. But most of the time, if you see one of those old mesh satellite dishes in somebody's yard, you can go and talk to them, and most of the time they'll give them to you just to get them out of their yard. They're an eyesore for people, and so that's what I've done. All 6 of my solar trackers, I went around. One solar tracker that I have back here, my big one, it's 10 foot by 8 foot with all the solar panels on it. That solar tracker was at our old farm. And luckily my second oldest brother still lives there, and I called him up when I got ready to build these, and I said, hey, is that old satellite dish still down in the barn? He said, yeah, it is. I said, well, then I want it. So that was the first one I got, and then we had some other family members that had them in their yard, and then some neighbors that had them in their yard. And I just went and talked to them, and they were happy for me to get them out of their yard. So you can get that part for free. And most of them still have the linear actuator still on them. I have a linear actuator here that I'm going to use on this particular project. It's a little bit bigger than the one I have up there. Most of them were 36 volts. Some were 12 volts DC and some were 24 volts DC. This particular one is 36 volts DC. You can see it has a label right here. It tells you the voltage and amperage of it. So that way you know what size fuse to put on it. And almost every one of them have limit switches inside. So once they reach the limit all the way out, they'll stop automatically. And that's the limit switch you want to tie into to go back to your home position. So I'll show you how to wire that up and how to do that also. But what we're going to do, we're going to build a solar tracker for less than 100 bucks. Now, if you go and try to buy one of these, they're anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000, depending on how big you want to get. So this is going to save a ton of money by building it yourself. You can get roughly, over the last 8 years, I've tested it several times. I've put some of these trackers, shut them off, and left some on to see what the amperage difference was. And you can get anywhere from 30 to 36% more power by tracking the sun than if you do it just fixed. So to me, that's well worth the investment to spend 100 bucks and a couple days worth of work to put my panels on solar trackers. You'll just have to calculate that yourself, see whether it's worth it to you or not. But to me, it was well worth it. So we'll get started. We'll go ahead and pull these old panels off. I'm going to use them on the barn project. So that's going to be a 12 volt system on the barn. So I'll go ahead and take these off. I'll put them in the barn, and when I get ready to use them, I'll mount them on the barn. But for today, we'll go ahead and try to strip everything off of it, and we'll start putting it back together, and I'll show you how to do it. Sorry, baby. Okay. All right. All right, a couple of these bolts are wanting to be a little aggravating to get out. So I went in and got a brass hammer because I want to save these bolts. These are stainless steel bolts. I want to use them on the tracker, so I don't want to mess up the threads at all. So I'm going to take this brass hammer and just tap them and see if I can get them loose to come out. And then I'll take my socket from the top side and try to get them the rest of the way out. I think I should be able to now. But if you use a regular hammer on them, you're going to mess the threads up. So. All right, that one come out pretty good. So these other ones will. Oh, that one's not wanting to. So we'll take a little brass hammer I made years ago, just improvised, but it works well for stuff like this. We'll see how that does. There we go. All right, we'll do these bottom two. Hopefully it won't fall off on me. Okay. One last one I can see. I need to take this old tracker wire off. It goes into there. Tell you what I'll do. I'm just gonna take a, see what size that is. Just take that off. Yeah, must be a metric. Yeah, all I need to do is break it loose and I should be able to get it off, so I'll try that and see. There we go. Oh, both the washers. That was part of the old solar tracker system. We're going to be putting a new one on. I'll show you how it works and where I got it. But you can purchase just the tracker part on Amazon, and I'll put the links down below on everything I use. But you can purchase just the tracker part for around $25 on Amazon. So that's not bad. There we go. Okay. I think that's everything. We'll take this last bolt out and should be able to strip it down to the head now, if I can hold it. Best if you have a helper for something like this, but I don't have one today, so we'll just take this off and set it down. Okay, I don't know if you noticed before, but I have a small panel here. This panel is a 12-volt panel that went down to a battery that operates the solar tracker. So we'll reuse that panel also. And then I have a little solar light on the top of it too, so at night when we walk by here, the light comes on. I do that with all my trackers in case something happens and I need to work on them at night. It gives me just a little bit of ambient light, and plus it lights up the driveway a little bit. Okay, so we're down to just the tracker now. I'll go ahead and pull this linear actuator off, flip it around so I can show you. But this is the head from the satellite dish here. You can see this is a 4-inch, I think, head, so I concreted a 4-inch piece of pipe down in the well casing. So this is your 6-inch well casing. This is roughly 4.5, 5 feet out. They're not all identical when he drilled them and stopped. Some of them are at 4 feet, some of them are at 5 feet. But this particular head here come from a family member of ours. It had a fiberglass satellite dish on it. So that's why you can see the square frame, and the actual dish, the concave part of the dish, sat right down in here. And then the wiring came up for the dish, for the satellite dish. So I'll go ahead and take this bolt back out real quick. I'll flip it up to where you can get a good look at it. Now, if we wanted to, we could build a dual axis solar tracker out of this. And this is your north-south, raising and lower, and you just spin this. And I don't build dual solar trackers. I can just come out here about 3 to 4 times a year and adjust it. I just take an adjustable wrench, loosen the locking nut, spin it around in the springtime. I'll tilt it up a little bit more, and then later on in the summer, closer to June, around the end of May, before the summer solstice, I'll come out here and I'll twist it, and I'll get the tracker to where it sits straight up and down, because your sun is at such a high angle at that time of year. You basically want this flat. You want your panels flat, so that way when the sun comes up in the east, in the morning it's flat and it follows the sun all the way across the sky to the west. So that way you get more power out of it. Now, if you wanted to, you could put a linear actuator. You could get a small linear actuator and put it here and do a dual tracker. But to me, it's just not worth the time or the money to do it. I just come out here about 3 times a year, adjust it. Then in the fall, this time of year in September, I'll tilt it up the way it is right now. And that way in the wintertime, when the sun is in the southern hemisphere and low in the southern sky, your panels are tilted up to where they can get the most sun. Now, the further north you are, the more this needs to be tilted. And it may be worth it for you if you live farther north than we do here in Tennessee. It may be worth it to do a dual axis. But for me, where we're at, our latitude and our longitude, it just wasn't worth it. But that's where you adjust that. This whole head pivots east to west. Linear actuator controls it. So let me go ahead and I'll pull this bolt back out real quick and I'll show you. Now, when everything's on here, this is very heavy. Right now, it's not going to be quite as heavy, but when you have your racking on here, you have your solar panels on here, it's extremely heavy. One person cannot hold it. It takes 2 people. But I'll just spin this right now around so you can see it. I'm not sure where there it is. So this is what you'll get when you get the satellite dish. This is basically the frames. Of course, there's dozens of different designs depending on the engineer, the company, how they design this. But this is the basics part of it. You can see I have the head mounted on a 4-inch pipe down in the well casing here. Has 4 bolts on it, 15/16 bolts. Once you mount it on there, you just tighten them up. I check mine about once a year, but I haven't found any of them loose yet, so once you tighten them up, they pretty much stay. But this is what you get to start with. Of course, we're gonna mount our unistrut and our super strut on this. So to me, it's easy enough just to come out here and adjust that 2 or 3 times. But this is what you get. This came off a fiberglass satellite dish. Of course, the dish sat right there in the center. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and take some unistrut, drill us some holes in here and mount unistrut on it, and then mount our solar panels on it. So I'm gonna go get a solar panel and measure for where I need to put my unistruts, but more than likely they're gonna be all the way against this piece of steel and all the way against that one in the corner. We'll just drill holes through it and bolt them on with a 15/16 stainless steel bolt, and we'll put that in all 4 corners, and that ought to hold us pretty good, and then we'll mount our solar panels on that. Now, I'm gonna use unistrut on this. I have some 80/20 that I was gonna use. You could use 80/20, that's what a lot of your fixed solar trackers are made from, or solar racks are made from, is 80/20, and that way you can adjust it. But with the unistrut and the super strut, they have holes every few inches, so you could probably move your panel to the left or to the right and make sure you hit one of those holes. But the 80/20 is quite a bit more expensive. For one stick that's 10 foot, you're looking at around $100, and if you use 2 10-foot sticks on here, that would be $200 to $300 after you pay your shipping for it. So that's why I decided to go with the unistrut. You can buy that at Lowe's or Home Depot or any hardware store for around $14 to $15 a stick for a 10-foot stick. So that's more economical, so that's what I've chose to use on this, and I think it'll be plenty strong enough for the winds that we get and the size panels we're gonna be mounting on here. So I'll go get a panel, I'll go ahead and take some measurements, measure here, we'll go ahead and get our holes drilled and get our unistrut and super strut mounted on this. All right, before I mount my linear actuator or our unistrut, I want to change this linear actuator out. I want to put the new one that I have, and it's really not a new one. I bought it at a yard sale for $5, but it can handle up to 600 pounds. So that's another thing with your linear actuators. You want to read on them and see how much weight they can handle, and then calculate how much weight you're putting on your solar tracker, and make sure the linear actuator can handle that much weight. If not, it's going to be blowing your fuse, or it's going to be burning up your motors on your linear actuator. So I'm going to take this little one off here. I'm going to go ahead and mount the bigger one on, and I think what I'll do is go ahead and hook the tracker up and wire it in, bring a battery out here, hook to it, and go ahead and test the linear actuator and the solar tracker and make sure it's working properly before I mount the solar panels on it. I'm not sure if this mount's going to be the same size, if my new one's going to fit in it, but the new one does have a mount on it. So if it doesn't fit, then I can just use the mount that's on it. I would prefer to leave this one on here, but we'll see in just a minute. You can see my new one already has a mount on it here. I'm going to slide it off, slide the little rubber gasket off, and see if this one will fit in this one. And like I said, if it doesn't, it's not that big a deal. I can go ahead and swap them out. I don't think it's gonna fit. Let me move my ladder in a better position, and then we'll see. Okay, I'm gonna have to get me a flat bar. Okay, I ended up having to take the mount off of this. Let me see where we're at here. Okay, I ended up having to take the mount for the linear actuator off of this. But one thing I do want to mention, if you have to change the mount out, there's a spacer right here on the inside of that. This is the metal bracket that goes, you have to have that spacer in there. So that way, as it tracks the sun, it keeps this part of the bracket away from the piece of metal. Every one of them have it. They have a little spacer in there. If not, this is gonna hit when your tracker starts to track, and it's gonna bind up on you. So make sure you have that spacer, and make sure you test it when you mount the new bracket on, and make sure that this part clears everywhere it can pivot. You can see how these pivot up and down, sideways, and they spin. You need to make sure that that clears. I've made that mistake before, so that's why I wanted to mention it. But remember, there's a little spacer. If not, you can get these little spacer at it, excuse me, at any hardware store, or just make them yourself. I just take a piece of brass and make them myself, but you can make those yourself, or you can go buy one. So, if we look at this linear actuator that I'm going to use, I'll pull the bracket off here. And you can see there's two spacers on this one. 1, 2 right here. So one of those spacers are going to go on the inside if it clears. The other one will go on the other end of the linear actuator, so that way it gives it room to pivot also. So we'll take this bolt off and pull both those spacers off. I'll keep one of them right here. And the other one I'll put on this side of it. So here's the spacer. On this side, your bolt heads are on this side, your nuts are on this side, so that way you have plenty of clearance right here. Now, this piece here pivots. So when I mount this, I need to make sure that as this pivots and moves, that it clears the bracket up here. So we'll go ahead and mount him on. And I'm just gonna hold it there because I can already tell this one's not gonna clear. So I'm gonna have to take another spacer and put on that. So I'm gonna have to use both the spacers that were on this. And like I said, it really depends on how the head is engineered on whether you need to use one or two. Okay, now that I have both of them on, I can tell there's plenty of clearance now. But one thing this is missing that I do want to put on here is a locking washer. So I'm gonna go in the shop and grab a lock washer real quick, and then we'll put that back together. All right, I have me a lock washer now, so I'm gonna go ahead and mount this onto the head. Get it good and tight, and then double check everything and make sure that it's gonna clear. Looks to me like it's going to, but you still need to double check it all. Make sure you get it good and tight, and that you can press the lock washer down. All right. So now, if I move that head around, it should clear. So, when this linear actuator's hooked to it, this is going to pivot up. It'll be facing the east like that, and then throughout the day, it should pull it, and it should move it right back down. Okay? So now we'll get our linear actuator on here. We'll bolt it in here, we'll bolt it up there, and we'll see how it looks. Let's see what size. Looked like it was probably a 1/2 inch. Okay. Now where you clamp these down on is going to be different for each solar tracker. It's one thing I have learned. So I generally just tighten one bolt, and then we'll put this bolt in here and we'll see how it tracks. But like I said, one thing I have learned, you may have to adjust this up or down depending on where it is and how the tracker is designed. So we'll go ahead and get us a bolt in here. I'll go ahead and pull this cover off, hook it to a battery real quick, and we'll run it up and down and we'll see how it tracks. Just use this one for now. Now I do have a spacer on this one also. I'm going to get a bigger bolt for this, at least a 5/16, maybe even bigger, to see how this is going to track, see how it's going to do. But for now, that'll work. That'll give me my answers once we test it. Now I already have the bottom loose on this because I took it apart and looked at it, checked everything, tested the linear actuator, make sure it worked, checked the limit switches, make sure they worked, and everything works fine. But I'll show you what this looks like underneath. And we'll just take us a couple wires and a couple alligator clips and we'll test it and see. So let me go ahead and grab the camera, put this bolt back in real quick. And I'll show you what these things look like. They're fairly simple. There's not a whole lot to them. Basically just a motor and a worm gear going up. So we'll take the camera here real quick. If I can get it to zoom in on it. Focus. Okay. So if you look here, this is the motor. This is the positive and negative, the red and black wire. And they come around, come to the limit switch. They have a little diode there, so that way the current only goes one direction in it. And then you can see the positive and negative going to the little terminal blocks. So what we'll do is we'll just take, and I'll set a battery on the ground, and we'll just take a couple leads and we'll just go in there and we'll test this. We'll run it all the way one direction and then all the way the other direction and make sure everything clears just fine. We may have to pivot our head, we may have to put some more spacers, or we may have to use a different size bolt. So let me go ahead and get a battery and some leads and we'll test that. Okay. This is your limit switch for your east. The bottom one is your limit switch for the west. You can see this little cam here. You can loosen those two screws and adjust it, and that's how you set your limit switch. So what you want to do is run it all the way to the east, set that cam to where it just shuts off that limit switch, run it all the way to the west, and set your other cam to where it shuts it off where you want it. So you need to adjust those first with the tracker empty, so that way you don't have a whole lot of weight on it. It's a lot easier to work on. Alright, we have our tracker put together, have our solar panels on it. I don't know if you could tell in the time-lapse video that I did while I was building it, but the only thing I did was drill 4 holes, 2 for the top piece of unistrut or super strut, and 2 for the bottom. I used 5/16 bolts in it with big thick washers on them. So that way you don't have to worry about your washers bending or anything. I like to use stainless steel bolts, but you don't have to use stainless steel bolts. But for your pieces of super strut, you can buy them at Lowe's or Home Depot or any of the hardware stores for about $20 for a 10-foot piece. When I bought these, they were $15, but I looked the other night and they're selling for $19 to $20 a piece at Home Depot or Lowe's. But just drill your 4 holes, mount your super strut on it, make sure you have them parallel to each other, so make sure you measure an even distance past your solar tracker, your head, to get them in the center, and then measure from the ends to each other to make sure that you have them square. If not, you can use a big framing square, but I just measure from end to end, make sure they're square to each other so that way everything lines up well. So now the only thing I lack is mounting my sensor. I have me a little bracket here. I went out to my scrap steel pile and found a little piece of steel, drilled a couple holes in it and mounted it. So I'm going to mount my sensor up, run my wire down. I'm going to have to add a little bit of wire to it. It's not quite long enough, so I'll just cut it and I'll solder in a piece of wire to it. I still need to zip tie and tidy up these wires for the linear actuator, and then I'm going to have to go ahead and get all my MC4 connectors hooked up to my solar panel and wired up to my combiner box. But that's all there is to it. It's simple. Like I said, you give around $20 for a 10-foot piece of the unistrut, so that's $40 for them, and then the solar tracker is $29 on Amazon, and I'll put the link to that in the description down there. But let me show you the solar tracker here. When you order your solar tracker, this is how it comes. This is your sensor, your east and west sensor, just little panels on it that's measuring the resistance coming in of the sunlight. And then this is the control box. Now, one thing I do with the control box, if you could mount it inside your combiner box or in a weatherproof box, they'll last a lot longer. I've used these. These are just cheap little Chinese ones, but they've worked well. I've used these for 4 to 5 years now. But one thing, if you have to mount it outside, go around the outside edge of your whole box with some clear silicone. And same with your 4 screw holes, go around them with some clear silicone. And then the bottom, your strain reliefs, go ahead and put some clear silicone on them. And I do all that before I even mount the box, if I have to mount it outside. But this is the way it comes. You have a fuse already in it, so there's already a fuse. So your red and black wire go to your battery. So whatever kind of battery, or if you're gonna power it directly off your solar panels, which I don't recommend, but you can do it. Your positive and negative will go to your battery. And then this is your connector for your linear actuator. Your green is your black, so your ground. Your yellow is your hot, your red. So your red and black wire will go right in here in this little Phoenix connector. It just has little set screws on it. So the linear actuator, which this is the cable that I'm running for my linear actuator, the positive and negative go in the little Phoenix connector here. And another thing, where these connect, I like to waterproof them also. Now you can take a big piece of shrink tubing and go over them and some silicone, or you can mount them in your combiner box. And that's what I do, is I mount them in my combiner box, so that way they're waterproof. I don't have to worry about them getting wet and shorting out or rusting over the years. So I like to mount that inside my combiner box, but to do that, you have to take this Phoenix connector off to get it through your strain relief. So what I do is I just cut the yellow and green wire down here, and then I run them through my strain relief, and then I just take solder and a little piece of shrink tubing, and I solder them back together and then shrink tubing over it, so that way it protects them, that way it won't short out inside my combiner box. But this is your solar tracker. It's around $29. Your 2 pieces of unistrut are $20 a piece. If you use stainless steel bolts like I do, and you have to order those, they're gonna cost you $20 or $30 for those. So you're gonna come in right around $100 to build a solar tracker. And to me, it's well worth $100 in a couple days' time to build these solar trackers. You can get more power out of your solar panels. You don't need as many solar panels. So I like building solar trackers for my solar panels. But if you have any questions, any comments, please leave them below. If you want to see how I wire up the solar panels to a combiner box, which is the same with a solar tracker as it would be with a ground mount or a roof mount, it's all the same. But if you want to see that, leave that in the comments, and I'll go ahead and do a video on that and show how I wire up the solar panels and get them into my battery bank. But if you have any questions, comments, please leave them below, and thanks for watching.